Okay. And so we are moving on in the textbook to chapter 4, which is a full stack web app that does CRUD. And so there's a lot in this chapter, and so we're gonna break this lecture up into a couple of pieces. Some today, some tomorrow, maybe even a third day, just to kind of break it in slowly. So this will be what we're ultimately creating. Is this basically movies lists, right? And we'll do CRUD operations. You can kind of see you can add new movies, you can edit movies, you can delete movies, and obviously you are reading movies when the thing loads. So full CRUD operations and working with SQL database, SQL Server, normalized tables, right? Primary keys, foreign keys, all that kind of stuff. Relational databases, so you have related tables through their keys. And so this is what we get to look forward to building. Kind of a screenshot of the add a movie page. All this has data validation in it, and so required fields and range validators, all that fun stuff. The difference between add and edit is not much, other than when you edit a movie, it kind of preloads the data that you're editing into those controls. And so one of the tricks that they use is reusing the controls of one view for both of these purposes. Because literally, other than a heading, it's the same thing, and one of them pre-populates it with some data. You can kind of see there's some genres that are in a drop-down option list, and then you can rate them 1 to 5 stars. And then here's the deletion. You get a little confirm. Are you sure you want to delete? So this is basically what we're building. And so this is ultimately where we're going. Now, right now, we don't have any of this. We'll kind of start from scratch. This movie list, we'll be able to start from scratch and generate all this. So at the end of this, this is our folder structure. Now, a lot of this is going to look familiar. There is something there called migrations, which are new, which deal with seeding data. And so, in other words, we're going to be creating a database and creating tables, and these migrations are going to help us create that database and create those relationships and create those tables. Yeah.
Is this like going back to the MySQL days, or is this something
SQL? Yeah, we're going to use SQL Server,
Okay.
and so, to dive a little bit deeper into that, you can open up any solution. And if you remember, because you mentioned MySQL, but what we used in C# was called local DB, right? And so there's a tab over here that I just clicked on called Server Explorer. If it's not there for you, it's View, Server Explorer, or maybe it's under View.
SQL Server Object Explorer?
There's a couple.
Okay.
Yeah, SQL Server Object Explorer is one, but Server Explorer is this one that I'm on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a slight difference between those, but what you can kind of do is you could see that these are the data connections that I have access to. So this is one database, AdventureWorks. This is one called Rankin. This is one called Premiere. So these are some databases that I kind of have. Now, we also did work in the Object Explorer. If you open that up, this is what I'm looking for. Because here I could see that my instance of SQL Server is called LocalDB. And underneath there, I could see these are some different databases, including a movies database that that we will be creating. Now I've already created this, so I'll delete this and kind of start over, right? But this is where we're going. And if you kind of just look, these are some different databases that are under this local DB instance. Let me go ahead and close this solution. And I just wanted to point out that this migrations folder is new. You haven't seen this migrations folder. This deals with, like, again, this deals with creation of our database, creation of our tables, as well as seeding that database. And we're going to learn this thing that'll help us with all this. This tool called Entity Framework. Maybe you've heard of Entity Framework. But we're going to use this tool called Entity Framework that will help us automate kind of some of this stuff. Automate the creation of this database. So we still have our models. Also, what's different about our models is that now our models, if you notice, there's a genre model and there's a movie model. And if you remember, when I was looking at my movies database and I was looking at the tables, notice I've got my genres in my movies table. So the models that we create are going to be used to create tables in our database. Right now, our models, we just use them to kind of put some logic in and have some properties in, and they're not creating tables in a database. But this is where we're going, that with this entity framework thing, now our models become tables, and then we get to basically create relationships between these tables with this entity framework. Okay. Models are still the same with a little different. Views are still your front end. Controllers are still handling requests and kind of the middleware, if you will. Migrations will help us to create the database and seed it with some data. Program.cs doesn't really change. I think that's a typo, don't you? JSONian? It's appsettings.json. And we'll get into that file very quickly. And so one thing that app settings does, since we're basically here, that's probably what I meant to put in there, connection strings. And so if you remember, a connection string is basically what it sounds like. A connection string is going to connect your app to the database, okay? And that including, is there an IP address? Is there a username and password? Credentials, in other words. IP address or URL, credentials. What are the settings? And so connection strings are the settings to connect your app to the database. And that's going to be inside of this appsettings.json. When I did this, and I'm trying to remember if I just started from an empty project, I'm pretty sure I did. So if you guys want to code along, you can. I'm going to do that. I'm going to create an empty project in Visual Studio. So File, Close Solution. And create a new project. And this is an MVC ASP.NET Core Web App. Next. And I'm going to start putting these like in an organized place so I can always recall on them later. So I'm just going to start putting my repos here. Okay, and the solution will be ch04 movies, and then the project name will be movies. Okay, so I'll kind of hold this here for you guys who are coding along. And all these defaults are good, so let's create. Go back to server. Okay, I'm going to unpin this. Auto hide that. Yes, sir. I am recording. Okay. And so the first thing that we do when we want to work with a database is we need to install a dependency called Entity Framework. And so to get a definition of what is Entity Framework, we'll just Google search it. Entity Framework is called an ORM, an Object Relational Mapping Framework. So and just to break that word down, Object Relational Mapping Framework. It kind of maps our objects into tables, is essentially what it does. And so it's a middle, I don't want to say middleware, it's a middle tool. It's a tool that we're going to use to essentially tie in our C# code into a database. And when you look at Entity Framework, core, of course there are different versions of Entity Framework like everything else. EF Core is the latest version of Entity Framework. And generally speaking, Entity Framework, you can kind of have one of two models. There's two different models when working with Entity Framework. There's what's called code first, which is where you kind of start with a model and then use that model to generate your database. So there's Entity Framework code first, or there's Entity Framework database first, right? Where you generate your tables in a SQL Server and then use those tables to generate your models. We are going to do the EF code first. So in other words, we're gonna generate a model, which is a C# class, and then based on that model, it'll generate our tables. In order to work with Entity Framework Core, we need to install it. Like I said, it's a package, it's a dependency. And so to do that, I've got my Movies app here. I'm going to go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager. Manage NuGet packages. So you got the console or you got the GUI. So this is just going through the GUI. And I'm going to click on Browse. It kind of went to installed. There's no installed packages, but if I click Browse. Now, I'm going to do this a couple different ways. I'm going to do it the book way, and then I'm just going to do it as if I were doing it on my own. So the book recommends Microsoft. You can kind of see that it's auto-filling some stuff for me. Microsoft Entity Framework Core .SQL Server. And this is what I'm looking for right here. Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server. Okay, now that's putting in this dot notation. That good luck remembering that. I just wonder if I search Entity Framework, and I just want to type it in.
The seventh one down. Sixth one down, I bet.
Yeah, it's there. You just got to kind of know what you're looking for. You're looking for the SQL Server Entity Framework. And then the other one you're looking for is underneath that, Entity Framework Core Tools. Okay, so again, Microsoft Entity Framework Core. Let me ask you guys this question. Is this autofilling for me because I've done it before, or is it? It did not autofill. Okay. So I'm typing this in, and it's there. And then what you do is you select the movies project, and then you click on the latest stable, 702. We click install. And it's going to make a bunch of changes. I'm cool with that. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click I accept. Okay, and if I look at output, it just says finished. Everyone's happy, installed, no error messages. So that's SQL Server. Now under installed, I've got Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server. Click the X, let's browse. And now we're doing the Entity Framework Core tools, Microsoft Entity Framework Core .tools. Looks good to me. Installing it there, click on install. Click on OK. I'm going to accept. And we get a bunch of successfully installed tools, 2 movies, finished. Okay, good thing I highlighted this. Yeah. Just want to double check myself real quick on one thing. So out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to install this one labeled Entity Framework Core as well. Because that makes most sense to me. Like this is the main Entity Framework Core is a modern object database mapper for .NET. It supports link queries. Heads up, we'll be writing some link. Blah, blah, blah. Schema migrations. EF Core works with SQL Server. And so that makes the most sense to me that we're installing Entity Framework Core. I don't think we needed to install SQL Server. Why I installed SQL Server is because if you look on page 139 of our textbook, on step number 2, it literally says type Microsoft Entity Framework for SQL Server in the search box. But on the left, it says manually add EF Core and EF Core tools. This is EF Core. This is EF Core tools. Why would they tell me to search for SQL Server? I don't know, other than maybe that would bring up the EF Core, right? Certainly by searching for this exact query that they gave me right here, this does come up as a response. Okay, so pretty sure we didn't need to install this, but I'm not gonna bang my head against the wall. We should be good to go. We could uninstall it, but I'm gonna keep it. Okay. Okay. It was that one in the tools. Yep. So if I NuGet package manager and I look at my installed, right now I've got these 3 installed. The next file that we're going to create, I didn't discuss it much, but if you look under models, if you look under the models folder, there is a new file called movie context. And this movie context is going to help us relate our C# classes like genre and movie into a database table. And so this is kind of the file that ties in the classes in our models into the table. So we're going to create this movie context file inside of our models folder. And so let's go ahead, right click, add a class. And this is a movie context. Now, again, convention is everything here. So it will be the movies table that this relates to, right? Since this is an ORM, everything is going to relate to something in a database. This movie context will relate to a movie table that is not yet created. And because this is C#, this movie context will inherit DB context. And in order for that to work, we had to have a using statement. Let's see if it says show potential fixes. And let's bring in Microsoft Entity Framework Core. So point is, we add a using statement at the top of our movie context. And when you add this using statement, that allows us to inherit from this parent class, DB context. And this class will look funky the first time you see it. You'll get used to it. But let's kind of talk through it. When I say public movie context, this is our constructor, right? A constructor is a method with the same name as the class. There's this DB context options. Movie context, and you can probably guess this is some options. Colon base. If you remember, anyone remember base? Base.
Vaguely from C#.
Yep.
Yeah.
Base passes these options that come in up to the parent class constructor. So DB context is a class we're inheriting from. So basically, we get this data that comes in. This data, we're calling it options. We'll see that in practice when we actually send data into the options. Okay, and we're going to say, okay, take that data and send it up to the parent. That's what base does, and we kind of have the method itself is empty. There's nothing there. So that's our constructor for this class. And right now, our table is pretty simple. DB set. So we're going to have a movie. This is not going to compile because we don't have a movie class, but we will soon. We're going to call it movies. So this is basically our movies table, where each record is a movie.
Is movie and movie context a list? Is that why we're putting it in angle brackets like that?
Is movie and movie context.
Yeah.
Those are referred to as generics.
Okay.
And so a list is a data type that can accept like a list of ints or a list of characters or a list of what have you. This syntax right here is called generics, and generics just say, hey, this class can have any kind of data type. Like a list can have any kind of data type.
Gotcha.
So that's what that's called. That's called generics. Equals null, semicolon, okay. And so, again, this movie context, it's going to look pretty funky the first time you're seeing it. It definitely looked funky to me. It still, still a little strange. Now, you know, where we need to go from here is to actually create our model. Right now, we don't have a model. And that's why we're getting these red squigglies, is because there is no data type of type movie. And so let's go ahead and create a class of movie inside of models and start to clean this up. Add a class, singular movie. When I look at this, this says that my database has a table called movies, plural, and each row is a movie. And as we add tables here, you'll see more of this syntax. Each DB set, each database set of individual movies called movies. Yeah, Josh.
What does the exclamation mark do at the end of null?
What does the exclamation mark do at the end of null? Shouts null. Very funny.
Adds enthusiasm to it.
So it's right here in the textbook. I'm going to read out of the textbooks. To allow the assignment of a null value, you can code the null value followed by the null forgiving operator exclamation point. This operator tells the compiler it's okay to assign a null value, which suppresses any compiler warnings that would typically be displayed if you assign a null value to a non-nullable type.
Gotcha.
So if I delete that,
Yeah,
we get the green squiggly.
Yeah.
And if we bring that in, thank you for asking that question. And I'm glad that's... Now, that is, you know, we're working the latest version of C#, right? That might be only a year or two old syntax. And so that kind of like that whole, what does it do? Suppress warnings?
Mm-hmm.
Like that might not be very old.
That's cool.
Yeah. You know, and you can kind of think of this as like, hey, this is going to eventually allow us to get movies out of our database and put new movies in. Let's get and set properties. Back into movie, this is a pretty standard class. I really don't think there's too much here. If we bring in now, okay, there is some convention here though. So let's code the first public int movie ID get set. So what's interesting is entity framework EF will make anything make any ID a primary key. And so you could call it ID or you could call it movie ID, but this is going to be a primary key for us, right? And it does have a convention of kind of auto incrementing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can override that. We'll learn to do that as it goes on, but as we're just learning this, public string name. Name is required, error message. A name. Of course, please enter a name and equals string dot empty. I highlighted that. Again, it's kind of a default value is that your name would be an empty string until you give it a name.
Is that why it was given a green squiggly? It was away string.empty, it didn't like that. Take away the equals. And it was like, hey, green squiggly.
Non-nullable name must contain a non-null value.
So if you wanted it to be nullable, you put question mark by string, right?
Right. Nullable. Nullable. So empty string by default versus a null. Next is a year. Public int, nullable int, year, get set. Required, error message. Please enter a year. Range.
Why are we making it nullable if it's required?
Why are we making it nullable if it's required? So, well, and again, it's always dealing with like when the page loads, like you have an empty text box where you need to allow the user to type in the year. It's not going to be a value there by default, kind of thing. Yet when they go to post it, right, that's going to be a required value. So that's kind of one way to look at it. They got an interesting range of 1889 to 2999. Comma, error message. And finally, the rating, the 1 to 5 star rating. So public int rating get set. One to 5. Error message. Forgot my. Okay. So there's really, other than some newer C# syntax, not too much new in that particular file. Okay, so now that we have our movie kind of squared out, I'm going to go back into movie context. And we're going to write a method that, again, this is going to be used to tie in our movie class into a table called movies. And we're going to fill that movies table with some dummy data. And I went ahead and I still have this movies database here. I'm going to delete this, close existing connections. So like I've never done it before. So now I'm like you guys. I don't have this database. And if I refresh this under databases, I don't have a movies database anymore. Okay. And so public override void on model creating. Now, let me see if I can get any IntelliSense here. Okay. Model builder. Called model builder. And this is, again, this is just the seed data. This is the syntax to get in some seed data into our movies table. Model builder entity movie dot has data. And at the end of this, there's a semicolon. New movie object, curly's, movie ID of 1, name of Casablanca, years 1942, rating of 5. On model creating. Okay, had to pause the recording there and change one keyword from public to protected. Leaving that as public, I was getting a compiler error. Protected took care of that for me. So again, we are on our way to creating this table and seeding this data. There's 3 movies, and so this has data will accept basically an array of movies, and so we'll kind of instantiate those movies like this: new movie, and then I'll put a comma, new movie, comma, and then a third movie, new movie. Of course, the last one does not have a comma. And movie ID 1, movie ID 2, 3, Wonder Woman, years 2017. Rating is a 3. Moonstruck, (1988). Rating 4. Okay, so our seed data is pretty simple. Again, this method is going to allow us, using this model builder object that's passed into the method, to seed our data into our movies table, created right there. Okay, now I'm going to pause again. Okay. Yeah, cleaned up those errors. I guess the only other thing worth noting here is that when you're seeding data like this, you do, even though this is like an identity column, you do have to provide this ID column of value. And then after that, after your seed data, like any new movies will go 4, 5, 6, and so on automatically. But just when you're seeding data initially, you do need to provide those values. Yeah, and so again, it's all convention. So I believe it would accept either like ID or movie ID, but anything with ID in it is basically is going to be, it just knows. Yeah. So movie ID is what we used. But yeah, anything with ID is like, hey, the primary key. Movie context, movie ID. Okay, now I'm gonna kind of bring back these two files. We started looking at before program.cs. It's kind of where you build the web server and say, you know, some routing defaults. But app settings, we identified this app settings file is where we're going to put our connection string. And so we need to connect into our server. So let's, and our server meaning what? Well, we've got, and you guys can check this out for me. Make sure this is on your end. Under View, let's click on SQL Server Object Explorer. And under SQL Server, you should have one called localDB / MSSQL localDB. Got a couple nodding heads?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So this should be, installed on your machine when you run the Visual Studio installer and you check the right checkboxes. And so SQL Server I always thought was a little funny in that it runs, you can have instances of SQL Server. And so, the version is called localDB. That's your SQL Server version. And then the first instance is called MSSQL localDB. But I have two instances. It's almost like, I guess you would say, two instances of Excel running at the same time, two instances of this software hosting different databases. And so if I look under here, these are my databases being hosted under this instance. What if I connect into this instance, there's, some other databases. You really don't want to mess with these databases. These ones called master and model, like, you leave those alone. You mess with those, it's going to break some stuff. And so somewhere along the line, you can kind of see I did this code first entity framework school context. So I've done some of this stuff before, students and grades, this kind of jazz. But back to the point at hand, app settings is going to be where we connect into our localDB. So I'm going to add in a comma after this star. And we're going to add in connection strings. That's nice, it auto-filled. And we've got this curly. Now server equals. I'm going to use copy and paste as my friend. So I'm going to go here. And I'm just going to click rename, copy, localDB. And server equals quote paste. Now I don't need this slash here. I don't know if I typed that or that was a mistake. But let's.
Do you think quotes around server equals?
No, I think I. Let's see. Yeah, I think I put too many quotes there. Okay, I'm cleaning this up. Okay, so we've got the curly brace up at the top. Then we've got an open quote, the word server, localDB, // right? localDB. Now the book has that lowercase, that should not matter. Colon, database. We're still inside the quote.
Semicolon database or colon database?
Semicolon. Good eye. Database movies. Trusted. I'm putting this all on one line. Trusted connection is true. Again, these are settings to connect to the database. and multiple active result sets equals true. I'd give everybody a dollar bill if no one had a typo on that. That's going to happen.
Where did you copy and paste that?
Good question. So under SQL Server Object Explorer, I right-clicked and renamed. Just copied that. Don't change that. Just copy it.
Result sets to the single result. Sets equals true.
Now it does say I'm missing a colon. Where does... Oh, there is one thing I missed. Movie context. See, I already lost. I lost the dollar because I had a typo myself. You have to add the string movie context and then a colon and then this long string with settings in it. Let me collapse this so you can see it a little bit better.
Can you go to the very end?
Yeah, trusted connection true, multiple active result sets equals true.
Now, is it going to matter that one of your trues is capital and the other is lowercase?
No, it shouldn't. I actually think this will be okay, caps or not. I think that'll be okay. Good question. Curly, curly. Okay. As long as I've been working in .NET, which is actually some years now, you know, you're always dealing with these connection strings, and let me tell you, when it goes live, of course, you're changing the connection string in many cases, right? So part of deployment is updating these connection strings to the new database URL, right? In most production servers, your application server is separate from your database server. Scroll back to the right. Yeah.
Oh, I had a typo.
I did too.
Oh, my dollar.
And I did highlight it. It says, for this string to work correctly, though, it must be coded on one line. So the movie context line that we did code on one line needs to be on one line. Now, I highlighted something here that I'm going to read out loud, and it's really not going to make sense at all until you do it. Okay, I remember reading this, I remember highlighting it, and I'm like, I have no idea what that means. But it comes with clarity when you actually, in a little bit, in a little bit, this will come with clarity. But the next thing we're going to do, is we're going to modify our program CS to enable what's called dependency injection. And dependency injection. Well, dependency means it's required. You have a dependency on something. It needs it. It needs something. Right, and the injection means you're able to pass this dependency into the controller that needs it. It's kind of what it boils down to. So again, I'm going to read this out loud. I tried to put my own words to it, but it will make more sense when you actually code this. But okay, here we go. Dependency injection is a design pattern in which the services of an object needs are passed to it rather than being hard-coded as part of the object. Okay? ASP.NET Core MVC uses dependency injection to pass DB context objects. Okay, so DB context objects to the controllers that need them. Okay, so again, this is going to be code that we will use here in a little bit, but for right now, we need to enable what's called dependency injection. The way that we're going to do that is inside of our program.cs file. Again, this is in the root, program.cs. And I'm going to go right above this var app equals builder.build. This is going to be line number 5. And this is where I'm going to add what's called EF core dependency injection. Builder services add DB context movie context options arrow options use SQL Server builder. This is so much going on here. Builder dot configuration dot get connection string movie context end the quote triple parenthesis semicolon. Keep that on the screen for a minute. Thankfully, we don't have too much more to do to get this database spun up and at least looking at it. Okay, because we got 15 more minutes of class or so and not a whole lot more to accomplish. Yeah, let me zoom out. It's not a bad idea. So view, let's see, control. Oh, there's going to be right here. Ooh. How does that look on your screen? Let's go to
Like one more in.
150.
Yeah.
Good idea. ASP.NET Core MVC uses dependency injection to pass DB context objects to the controllers that need them. Maybe I didn't highlight this clearly enough because I'm just sitting here thinking, I don't know that we really talked about this DB context class in a little bit more detail, but this DB context class well, I did, is the primary class that we use to connect to a database. So if controllers have to connect to a database, we're going to be working with this class. Okay. I think we are ready to go and spin up this database. And so the next thing we're going to do is run a console command or a package manager console. So we're going to do tools, package manager, console. And we're going to type in what's called add migration. And we're just going to name this migration the initial, and press enter. So again, the command is add -migration space initial.
You put in teal. You need that extra
I do need initial.
Initials, lowercase. Or should be.
I believe capitalize is good. Okay, I'm gonna hit enter. And this kind of creates, what this does is it essentially kind of creates a script, and you can actually see what it created for us. It opened it up for me. It called this file the initial, like this is like the initial creation of the database, is the way I think of this. And it created this method that is used to create a table called movies. All of our properties are going to relate to columns. So there's an ID column, there's a name column, there's a year column, a rating column. We got a primary key. The point of this file that's created is that you can kind of inspect the command. It's not run yet. We haven't created the database yet, but this is about to run, right? So you can kind of inspect like what's happening when you run this migration. This migration is just going to run this up method. This method is going to create a table called movies with columns. Then it's going to put some data into there. So that's good. So the fact that this file was created, again, I want to kind of point this out, is now this is the migrations folder that we mentioned before, right? That we were not familiar with. And then there's one more command to run, which is update -database, and press enter. And at the end of it, it just simply says it's done. I don't get an error message, so that's good. Means like it looks like it works to me. If you got an error message, I'll be right there. Let's test. Now, if you come back here, you're going to wait a minute. Where's my database? This happens all the time. We need to refresh. So if I refresh here and I kind of expand this back out, aha, there's my movies database. Aha, there's my tables. And if I right click and view data, there it's all working. We have success.